Gotta say it, 8GB GPUs, they're dead. Do you see this RTX 4060? Do you see it struggling to run a single game now? I know, it's pathetic. And you know what's more pathetic is Nvidia is selling this graphics card for $300. It's honestly cinema that Nvidia is selling $400 for a 4060 Ti. Am I in crazy town? I take crazy pills. I don't even know what's happening anymore. It's the 4060, but worse. And that's because nowadays, so many games want more than 8GB of VRAM, even at just reasonable settings. The number on the left in all these tests is how much VRAM the game wants, and then the number on the right is how much the game is actually using. In Space Marine 2, if you want to play with the 4K textures, which really do look good, it improves the visual experience of the game, and you can download them on the store if you want, for free, on 1080p high settings. You can see we're using a lot more than 8GB of VRAM. In Indiana Jones, a new game that just came out, is a VRAM hog as well, and this is just with medium textures in the game, medium texture streaming. And if you put this thing on the 4060, it looks like a stuttery mess. Last of Us Part 1, 1080p on high settings, but especially on ultra settings. The 4060 just can't even really run this game properly because it's using more than 8GB, like pretty comfortably. Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p high settings. It uses more than 8GB, and it's even exacerbated if you turn it up to ultra. Black Ops 6, unbalanced. But for some reason, the balance settings actually turn down the textures a lot in the game, and they look really blurry and gross. So if you actually want decent textures in the game, turn them up to high, and it uses a lot more than 8GB of VRAM. And this whole 8GB situation, I mean, it's only going to get worse, guys. These games are going to want more and more VRAM, as we've been seeing over the years. On top of that, ray tracing uses more VRAM. We see this in so many games. So good luck ever using ray tracing on a 4060, it's going to struggle. You might think if Nvidia is bad with VRAM, then AMD must be better. You're wrong. You're just wrong. The 7600, the budget entry point GPU for AMD's current generation, is $250, and that guy still has 8GB of VRAM. And then you got to pay another $70 to give it more than 8GB, to double the VRAM, but you still get the same performance. It's still really mediocre. So it's not really worth paying $70 goddamn more to get an upgrade to that card. Why would you do that? It sucks. And all of this, with these graphics cards, the 4060, 7600, these have all been marketed at 1080p gaming in 2024, yet they cost $250 plus most of the time. I don't really understand, but more and more people are switching to 1440p because the monitors are pretty cheap, and 1440p is honestly probably the best and ultimate resolution for a desktop gaming experience, but 1440p uses even more VRAM. So these cards were never marketed as 1440p graphics cards, which is why I've actually been recommending the RX 6750 XT as the budget-ish graphics card of choice. And that's because this guy has 12GB of VRAM, and it's honestly so much faster than the RTX 4060. It's still $300. Why the hell is this card built on 4-year-old architecture, and it's somehow still the budget champion? And that is why Intel has blessed us with this, their $250 GPU, the Intel Arc B580. Intel did not skimp on this card. I actually tore down the B580. I took it down to its bones to see what it makes it tick, and I got to see those sweet, sweet gigabytes of VRAM. Oh, what beautiful things they are. Now, you can just look at it destroy the RTX 4060. Give the RTX 4060 what it deserves. It feels cathartic even, and I'm just being a hater at this point, but man, the 4060 is just a really lame card, and it deserves to get destroyed. In Cyberpunk, 1440p native on high settings, this B580 is 28% faster, actually makes the game playable, whereas the 4060 is just struggling. If we turn the settings up to ultra, 42% faster on the B580, that's definitely partly the VRAM coming into play here. And to note, in Cyberpunk, I'm not using the benchmark because Dogtown here in Cyberpunk is a more realistic way of actually playing the game. The left number is the average of the little overlay here, and then the right number is the 1% low, but an average of the 1% lows. And in that case, the lower the number, the more the game is like stuttering or is basically inconsistent. And if you see above that, you can see all the stat counters for the GPUs themselves as they're running in real time. Average of the past 5 seconds. So the number on the left is the real-time FPS. The number in the middle is the average of the last 5 seconds. And then the number on the right, that is the average of the last 5 seconds of 1% lows. So if you want the full data, that's for the full benchmark pass. That's the numbers I have written below. Hopefully that gives you a better representation and you can pick up on certain things like stutters and stuff and how it really affects gameplay. And moving on though, Horizon Forbidden West, 1440p on high, just destroys the 4060, 38% faster here. Indiana Jones. This game uses quite a bit of VRAM at 1080p on high settings is wild. 24% faster. It's at 1080p, guys, and it's just the 4060 getting destroyed. I thought the 4060 was a 1080p GPU. If you want the 4060 to be able to breathe at least a little bit, then you have to drop your texture streaming down in the game to medium. But it is weird though, B580 is actually slower than the 4060. And this again is because of driver problems. I'm actually talking to Intel about this, but the B580 is having issues running Indiana Jones at the moment. Let's move on to Last of Us Part 1, a classic in the world of VRAM testing. 1440p on Ultra, 48% faster on the B580. Now, historically, Last of Us Part 1 has been a pretty weak title for Intel on their graphics cards, so it pulling ahead super far here versus Nvidia is quite the feat. And you can check the 1% lows too. The 4060 on the left is just super stuttery. This game really does look great on Ultra, so if you can play on it, do it. It doesn't use ray tracing or anything, so it's not going to absolutely destroy everything. It's just mainly a VRAM thing. And this performance uplift on the B580 actually makes, Last of Us Part 1 here playable at almost 60 FPS on it compared to the 4060. And if you turn on, just quality upscaling, it's showing a pretty similar thing where the B580 still pulls ahead and it's just at a higher FPS with just a tiny bit of upscaling. Now, hugely requested game, Stalker 2, because this game is just murdering graphics cards. I know a lot of people want to play it too. It's an Unreal Engine 5 game, but 1440p on high settings. Oh, good God. The 4060 is crying. And as you go into this kind of village area, this hideout area, the 4060 is honestly, it's running slow, but it's not terrible. But once you cross a certain point, it's like that VRAM threshold pops in and the entire game gets broken. You can see I'm trying to walk because I do this manually with a controller and I can't walk. I'm running at like 2 FPS or something. It's terrible. The B580 in terms of performance isn't really super playable either. So this is kind of a Pyrrhic victory, but it's interesting for science. And we'll take a look at Stalker 2 in a little bit too. Let's check out Elden Ring, because this is a bit of an oddball because this game is usually capped at 60 FPS. So I wanted to check it out at higher resolutions and stuff. We go to 4K on high settings. You can see that the B580 is 41% faster. It's impressive because it's still able on high settings to basically lock out 60 FPS even at 4K. This is no upscaling, this is no nothing. The 4060 can't do that. That says quite a bit because, could the B580 even be faster than 41%? You can also see in the Elden Ring test, the time of day is different and the weather might be different too. I don't really know how to test it in a way that avoids that. So if you know any ways to test that, then let me know in the comments below. There isn't actually that much VRAM consumption in Elden Ring, below 8 gigabytes. So this is more because of the performance of the B580 over the RTX 4060. And I think this is partly because the VRAM itself, so streaming data into the GPU, is way faster on the B580. Because this card has a 192-bit bus. And that equates to like 450 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. RTX 4060 only has a 128-bit bus because it has less VRAM in it. Speed caps out like 300 gigabytes per second max. And at higher resolutions and stuff, not only does it require more VRAM, but having faster VRAM itself can lead to more performance. And I think that is partially leading to see why we have such a big improvement on the B580. We also look at Remnant 2. It's 13% faster. This is really just a raw performance output because this game isn't very VRAM heavy either, but the B580 is putting up some good numbers. Same with Plague Tale Requiem, 1440p ultra quality upscaling on high settings. 40% faster on the B580 is actually kind of insane. Now, things get really interesting as we move on to ray tracing, because ray tracing uses more VRAM, but it's also one of the claim to fame features about Nvidia graphics cards. Not that Intel graphics cards haven't been catching up with this, because Intel graphics cards have made huge improvements with ray tracing with this generation too. And I'm gonna do probably a follow-up video comparing Intel's older cards to their newer cards, because the B580 just cooks the 4060 in Cyberpunk. Just with RT reflections, which I think is a very reasonable amount of ray tracing to turn on in the game, it looks quite good. It's 27% faster at 1080p. And if we use quality upscaling, the B580 pulls 61% ahead here, just with quality upscaling, which actually makes the game like very comfortably playable. I mean, I don't really like using upscaling at 1080p, even though Intel's XeSS one is pretty damn good. DLSS does play a little bit better on the 4060 here. Really says something that the 4060 is struggling to play with just a very minimal amount of ray tracing at 1080p with upscaling, but the B580 can completely pull this out, and I would be fine with playing the game like this. Then at 1440p, the B580 with a little bit of upscaling can get decent performance even at this resolution. I did play the game on the B580 with RT reflections for quite a while. Bro, this is insane. What? It's on ultra quality upscaling. It can still get 60 FPS with RT reflections on. Ran fine enough. I ended up turning it off eventually in favor of some more FPS, but at the end of the day, it was pretty good. Now, if we hop over to RT Overdrive, so the crazy ray tracing path trace setting in Cyberpunk, this is just hilarious on these cards because you really don't expect to play this on either of these cards unless you're playing at 240p. Then maybe it'd be a great experience. At 1440p, Smash Online, like Smash Ultimate PowerPoint presentation mode, I think that plays better than this does on the 4060, and the B580 can get a solid 7 FPS. I know, it's pretty crazy, but it's just kind of crazy how that VRAM does come into play. You can see how much that throttles the 4060, because if you do use some upscaling and alleviate that VRAM a little bit and ease up the load on the cards a little bit too, close to like 30 FPS in this game, which is definitely more on the more interesting note. And now we can jump back over to Elden Ring, because this game does have ray tracing in it, because the B580, it goes crazy in this game. 25% faster at 1080p, which means the 4060 couldn't even get 60 FPS at 1080p. It's 50% faster at 1440p, just keeps extending the league. At 4K, it's 75% faster. Is this a VRAM thing? I'm not sure, but the B580 is destroying the 4060. Even though Elden Ring doesn't have the craziest ray tracing in it anyways, it is getting clobbered by the B580 in this title. We go over to Plague Tale Requiem. This game only has RT shadows in it, so it's not a ton of ray tracing either. It's 34% faster at 1080p, the B580, so it's put some pretty damn good numbers, and it's 32% faster at 1440p. Now though, and I want to make this straight, this doesn't mean that the B580 is always faster than the 4060. Do remember that the 4060 does cost $50 more than the B580. And Alan Wake 2, it's actually 6% slower. Kind of hilarious. It doesn't even have the performance at $300 to play this game at 1080p on medium settings. So is that really that impressive by the 4060? I don't know, man. Then you got to use some upscaling anyways at this point to get like above 60 FPS. And if you do get there, then the performance is pretty similar, so I'm not sure if this will really matter too much. We hop over to Space Marine 2 with the 4K textures. Again, I really like the 4K textures in this game. It adds a lot to the experience. And at 1440p high with ultra textures, despite having more VRAM and stuff, it's still 24% slower in this title. And I don't exactly know why that's the case. I think this is because Intel needs to make optimizations for this game. I don't know if this is at a hardware level or a driver level. I'm not 100% sure. The 4060 only has 8 gigs. and it is still pulling ahead by quite a bit. Now, God of War Ragnarok really can go either way. These GPUs perform about the same. That's still impressive by the B580 to be $50 cheaper and still allow pretty close comparison. The 4060 also pulls ahead in Black Ops 6, despite the game actually wanting a ton of VRAM at 1440p. I'm using the high textures here because they look a lot better, but yeah, the 4060 does pull ahead in performance. And another downside on the B580 is it doesn't seem to do that well in Unreal Engine 5 games. Like, it loses by 11% at 1080p in Black Myth Wukong, and at 1440p, neither of these can get 60 FPS. And even using upscaling, the B580 is still 16% behind the 4060. This is an Unreal Engine 5 game and just seems to run better on the 4060. Intel might be able to make improvements on this. I don't know if this is a hardware or software thing. This is a little bit off topic about Black Myth Wukong, but guys, can we all talk about this? This should have won Game of the Year. I like the silly little monkey game. The f did this Mario ripoff game do? Yeah, moving on though, in Stalker 2, the B580 somehow loses here even at 1440p on medium settings. Honestly, just barely getting 60 FPS at 1080p, so that's even a stretch with medium settings. Like, it's just disappointing with how goddamn demanding this game is. On some upscaling with XeSS, it does pull ahead a good bit versus Nvidia's DLSS quality on the 4060. So I think this is because XeSS is running at a lower internal render resolution. Now, the last Unreal Engine 5 game that I tested here is Until Dawn. The thing is, the B580 loses by quite a bit at all resolutions. Like, at 1080p, it's 24% slower. At 1440p native, it's only 8% slower. But if you turn on upscaling, it's 39% slower at 1440p. And this is probably because the game forces the B580 to use FSR upscaling, and for some reason it just doesn't respond that well to the B580 in this game. I don't know, it almost feels like it does nothing to it, but it's definitely on, so I don't know what's happening. Actually, bonus Unreal Engine 5 game. Remnant 2, it does win on average, which is interesting here, but it can actually get lower 1% lows. So that means that the game is more stuttery on average, and especially as I walk by this crystal, that's where the huge stutter came in. And I did just yap about ray tracing on the 4060 and it kind of struggling because of VRAM and all that. But the 4060 can still have that Nvidia advantage at times. Like in Black Myth Wukong, the B580 just falls behind a lot. It's probably partially because of the Unreal Engine performance and performance in this game in general. At the same time though, the 4060 is not really getting very playable performance. In Alan Wake 2, the B580 is slower, even with medium ray tracing. Still aren't even fast enough to play at 1080p, even with upscaling. So it's a Pyrrhic victory for the 4060. So yes, Nvidia's 8GB GPU can be faster, but if you would say that the goddamn 4060, that mid-ass graphics card, if you're saying that that card wins to this day, fuck you. You're wrong. Yeah, the B580 destroyed the 4060 in quite a few games. Yeah, it lost in some games. This graphics card is $50 cheaper. It's like 16% cheaper. Or if you want to put it the other way around, the 4060 is 20% more expensive than the B580. The 4060 is not 20% faster most of the time. Definitely not on average, and it can have so many issues because it only has 8GB of VRAM. There's one area about the B580 I haven't really talked about yet. It's overclocking. Because if you overclock this card and say like Alan Wake 2, you know, the B580 was losing before, but now it's 4% faster than the 4060. The B580 is an overclocking demon. This card has so much juice to be extracted out of it. It's insane. Typically nowadays, cards just don't have that much overclocking headroom. I think about the RTX 4060 here. I tried overclocking that card. I could only get like 2 to 3% more performance out of it with an overclock. It's basically not worth doing. Initially, when Intel revealed the B580, they said that it had 190 watt total board power, which was pretty high. But the thing is, when I actually started using it, this card really wasn't drawing that much power. If you look at a lot of these tests, I mean, it's at like 110 to 120 watts. At the end of the day, it's running at about the same power efficiency as the 4060. And now Intel provides a really easy overclocking tool into their driver. All I really did was crank up the voltage quite a bit because I think this card is voltage limited. And I didn't even touch the power limit on this card because it has tons of power headroom apparently. And if I were to add more power limit, for some reason the card would crash. I don't really know why. Other than that, I just gave it a little bit of extra clock speed to tell it to boost up to it. And overclocking the RAM was a little bit touchy. I couldn't really push it too hard. I just pushed it up 0.5 gigabits per second. I can't guarantee that you're gonna get the same overclock if you do end up picking up a B580. Through my testing, it's getting 10 to 15% more performance on the B580 with the overclock. And to me, that is absolutely worth doing. The only problem is a little bit of stability, but if you have issues, I would pull back the power a little bit because 10 to 15% more performance is good, man. Because the B580 can be slower than the 4060, this brings that performance right in line with it when you have it overclocked. In the games, the B580 was already faster than the 4060, and that lead just gets greater with an overclock on it. It's pretty crazy. This brings a new meaning to an entry-level GPU because this guy is actually affordable. It's not going to be obsolete in a year because it has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, like 12 gigabytes should last you a decent bit. And overall, it gives solid performance, especially with an overclock too. I tested the RX 6600. Which has been kind of the go-to, like very budget graphics card. It's been the entry GPU I've been recommending to a lot of people if you're at $200, and that's how much that card has historically costed. If we really break it down in terms of performance, the B580 clobbers this card. Like on average, I think it's like 50% faster than the 6600. It is just disrespecting and dancing on its grave at this point in time. God of War Ragnarok in 1440p, it's like 75% faster, and again, this game doesn't really use more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so the B580 is just destroying it here. Plague Tale Requiem 1440p, 75% faster here as well. Space Marine 2 1440p, over 2 times faster, 50% faster at 1440p, allowing you to play at that resolution. Also, the B580 just destroys an Indiana Jones, but the 6600 has to deal with the built-in ray tracing in Indiana Jones. And I think we're gonna see this in more and more games. This might become more standard, and having decent ray tracing performance means you won't take as much of a performance hit from it. Yes, it does cost $50 more than the RX 6600, but at the end of the day, it is worth every single penny. All of that performance, you get that. You get that. Now you're also probably wondering, typically would recommend the RX 6750 XT at $300 as being kind of the GOAT. Okay, because this card is very fast and has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So how does this guy stack up against the B580? On average, I honestly find like if you exclude the ray tracing performance, the 6750 XT, it's faster. It's like 20% faster on average. There are some crazy outliers, like in Black Ops 6, it's 50% faster at 1440p. That's kind of wild. AMD cards, even the 6600, they perform quite well in this game. As well, in Until Dawn, a pretty big gap here on the 6750 XT. It's kind of wild. Indiana Jones also acts funky on the B580, as we talked about before. And that's kind of what we see here, as the 6750 XT pulls pretty far ahead. So this means that the B580 just doesn't win in a single game. If you do look at ray tracing though, every single ray tracing game, the 6750 XT gets destroyed. The B580 is better than the 6750 XT, despite having lower overall peak performance. And you have to consider too that this card, you know, the B580 is $250, and then this has been, when I've been recommending it, has been $300. And that means that this guy costs 20% more than the B580. And if it isn't getting 20% more performance all the time, then this card is not a better value. And when you factor in too that it has worse power efficiency, this card is also old as now. It's missing like key features like AV1 encoding, better ray tracing performance, even driver support into the future. This one's going to get less driver support as time goes on, as long as Intel keeps updating their graphics cards. And the B580 has better AI upscaling in the form of XeSS from Intel, where I think it looks better than AMD's FSR really in every single game. I'm really going to go into a separate video and talk about a lot of the features and how Intel has progressed over the years. I mean, this card isn't being found at $300. It looks like it's pretty much selling out. There's like one card at $350 if you want it. At that point, it's definitely not worth getting. So if you really look at the GPU market and all the things that are available, the B580 is the obvious choice from Intel. I think Intel, like, they really needed a win, and it seems like people are excited about it and they're buying it up right now. Like, this card is selling out. I've been told by Intel themselves that they didn't even expect the demand to be as high as it is, and people are excited to get this card. And that's because there's cards like the RTX 4060, way too expensive at $300 to have 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Like, that card is a ticking time bomb. And the 7600 from AMD, it's the same price as the B580, but it has less VRAM. And if we compare it to the 4060, the 7600 and 4060, I don't have the 7600, so I can't directly do a head-to-head, but they generally perform about the same. Yes, the B580 destroys the 7600 as well at 1080p, but especially at 1440p. And if you want to not be limited by VRAM on the 7600, you have to get the XT version, which is $320, so $70 more than the B580, and the B580 actually beats that graphics card despite it having more VRAM at that point in time. The 7600 is just kind of off the table at this point in time. And also, if we look at a card from 4 years ago too, the 3060 is still available for like $270 or $280 at the moment, and that card does have 12 gigabytes of VRAM, but the B580 destroys that card in terms of performance. It is just no competition. You wouldn't get the 3060. It makes no goddamn sense. We also looked at too the RX 6600 on the very more budget end of the spectrum. That card is not worth buying either compared to the B580, because the B580 is just better in value. It seriously surprised me how many games push 8 gigabytes as much as they do. I haven't really like looked at it in depth in a while, and holy shit, man, it is crazy. Nvidia, AMD, them offering these 8 gigabyte graphics cards, like, it is just disrespectful. And Intel has officially killed them. There's actually rumors that the 5060 might still be an 8 gigabyte graphics card even in 2025 with how competitive this card is. Hopefully we'll end up getting more VRAM in the future, because this is going to put pressure on the industry. Anyways though, I recommend the B580 for shopping this price point. It's impressed me. Especially with the overclock too. Try overclocking it. I wanted to give you guys an update because we did just hit 100k subscribers, which is really cool. I did a stream when we hit 100k subscribers and just celebration thing, but I also made an announcement during that. I was planning to go to CES 2025. If you don't know what CES is, it is an event in early January, so it'd be January 2025 that a lot of content creators typically go to. There's gonna be a ton of announcements there this year because we've seen rumors from Nvidia, AMD, Intel. They're all gonna be announcing products at that time. And there's all of the normal CES stuff, like Samsung usually announces their phones at that time of year. There's cool tech and everything. It's in Las Vegas, Nevada. I live in Ohio. Pretty decent trip. I'm not going to be able to drive that. The plan was to basically crowdfund the trip. Just allow me to not take sponsors, you know, keep the trip really authentic. I'm not tied down. I get to make content for you guys and do the best stuff I can. I had initially thought, and you'll see in the stream, if you look back at it, I said that the trip would cost $2,000 to send me and my friend over to Las Vegas for everything. I've never really planned a trip before, and I severely underestimated how much it would cost. And $2,000 was already a good amount of money. And it ends up being that it's like $4,000 to do the trip. So yeah, I think that's too much, especially for crowdfunding. I don't know. I just feel like it's not my time at this point. And if I was more comfortable with it, that kind of price and, you know, crowdfunding that stuff, then I would still do it, but I'm not there yet. I'm not going to be going to CES this year. I think it's too much to put on you guys, and I don't want you to give me $4,000. It seems like a lot of money. I also am not sure if I'd be able to provide $4,000 worth of value. If you were planning on donating or anything, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate it. But don't think that you guys are going to be missing out on a whole ton. Like, that'd be fun content to go to CES and do that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day though, so many product launches are going to be coming out. I'm going to be covering them, obviously. And I almost think I could probably do better coverage at home. Let me know if you're buying a B580. I'm going to see you guys in the next video. Y'all have a good one.